What if I told you that everything you've been taught about money is basically wrong? I mean, think about it. We're told to go to school, get good grades, find a secure job, buy a house, and save for retirement. That's the safe path, right? Well, Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad completely flips that script on its head. And honestly, it kind of blew my mind. Hey everyone, welcome back to BookBites. Today we're diving into one of the most controversial, and let's be real, life-changing, personal finance books ever written. So grab your coffee because we're about to challenge everything you think you know about building wealth. Who is Robert Kiyosaki? Alright, so first things first. Who is Robert Kiyosaki and why should we care what he has to say about money? Here's the thing. Kiyosaki wasn't born rich. He wasn't some Wall Street hotshot or trust fund kid. He was just a regular guy from Hawaii who had two father figures growing up. And get this, both were smart, hard-working men, but they had completely opposite views about money. One struggled financially his whole life, while the other became one of the richest men in Hawaii. That contrast? That's what sparked this whole book. Rich Dad, Poor Dad came out in 1997, and look, it wasn't an instant hit. Publishers actually rejected it at first. But then something crazy happened. It spread through word of mouth, became a New York Times bestseller, and has now sold over 40 million copies worldwide. I mean, come on, that's insane for a finance book. But here's where it gets interesting. This book is also super controversial. Some people swear by it, others think it's too simplistic or even misleading. So today, we're going to dig into both sides, but honestly, even if you disagree with some of Kiyosaki's specific advice, the core mindset shifts in this book. They're pretty powerful. The game-changing mindset. So what's the big idea here? The main thesis is actually pretty simple, but it'll probably make you uncomfortable. Poor and middle-class people work for money. Rich people have money work for them. We trade our time for money. We go to work, we get paid, we pay our bills, maybe we save a little, and then we do it all over again. That's working for money. But rich people? They buy or create assets that generate income while they sleep. Real estate that produces rental income, businesses that run without them, stocks that pay dividends, royalties from books or patents. You get the idea. Now, when I first read this, I was like, okay, but how exactly am I supposed to do that when I can barely afford rent? But the mindset shift, that's what's valuable here. The book basically says, stop thinking like an employee, start thinking like an investor. Rich dad versus poor dad mindset. All right, so let's talk about these two dads, because this is where the book gets really interesting. Kiyosaki's biological father, the poor dad, was highly educated. PhD, great job with the government, respected in the community. Classic American success story, right? But he always struggled with money. He'd say things like, I can't afford it, or money doesn't matter, or study hard so you can find a good company to work for. Meanwhile, his best friend's dad, the rich dad, barely finished 8th grade. But this guy built multiple businesses and became super wealthy. His advice was totally different. Instead of, I can't afford it, he'd ask, how can I afford it? Instead of, money doesn't matter, it was, money is power. And instead of, work for a good company, it was, learn how money works so you can have it work for you. Now look, I gotta pause here for a second because some people get really triggered by this comparison. They think Kiyosaki is dissing education or saying teachers and government workers are somehow lesser. That's not the point. And honestly, that criticism misses the bigger picture. The point is about mindset. The poor dad had what Kiyosaki calls an employee mindset. Security-focused, risk-averse, dependent on others for income. The rich dad had an owner mindset, always looking for opportunities, comfortable with calculated risks, focused on building systems that generate wealth. And here's what really hit me when I read this. Both mindsets make total sense given how these guys were raised and what they were taught. The poor dad was following the traditional American playbook perfectly. But that playbook, well, it's got some serious flaws. Assets versus liabilities. Okay, this next part is going to hurt a little, but it's probably the most important concept in the entire book. Ready? Your house is not an asset. Here's Kiyosaki's definition, and honestly, it's pretty simple. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. So let's think about your house for a minute. Every month, what happens? You pay the mortgage, property taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs, money flowing out of your pocket. Now sure, maybe it'll be worth more when you sell it someday. But right now, today, it's costing you money every single month. That makes it a liability, not an asset. Now, a rental property that you own? That's different. If the rent you collect is more than your mortgage and expenses, then money is flowing into your pocket every month. That's an asset. When I first read this, I literally had to put the book down. I mean, the idea of home ownership as the American dream is so deeply ingrained in our culture. My parents, your parents, everyone tells us to buy a house because it's good debt and you're building equity. But think about it. How many people do you know who are house poor? They bought the biggest house they could qualify for, and now they're stressed about money all the time because half their income goes to housing costs. Kiyosaki's point is this: rich people buy assets first, then use the income from those assets to buy their luxuries, including their house. Poor and middle-class people buy liabilities thinking they're assets, then wonder why they never get ahead financially. Now look, I'm not saying you should never buy a house. Home ownership can make sense for lots of reasons: stability, predictable housing costs, building equity over time. But don't fool yourself into thinking it's an investment that's going to make you rich. For most people, it's just a place to live that happens to hold its value. The Cash Flow Quadrant. All right, so now that we've covered assets and liabilities, let's talk about Kiyosaki's Cash Flow Quadrant. This is actually from a separate book, but the concept is introduced in Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and it's super helpful for understanding different ways people make money. Picture a big plus sign, 4 quadrants. In the top left, you've got E for employee. Top right is S for self-employed or small business owner. Bottom left is B for big business owner. And bottom right is I for investor. Most people live in the E quadrant. You trade time for money, you get benefits, you have some security, but you're also limited in how much you can earn because there's only 24 hours in a day. The S quadrant is where a lot of people think they want to be. You're a freelancer, consultant, small business owner. You're your own boss. But here's the catch. You're still trading time for money. If you stop working, the money stops coming. Plus, you probably work more hours than you did as an employee. Now the B quadrant, that's where it gets interesting. This is where you own a system or business that works without you. Think McDonald's, not the local burger joint where the owner flips burgers 12 hours a day. Ray Kroc wasn't in the hamburger business. He was in the real estate and systems business. And finally, The I quadrant. This is where your money works for you. Stocks, bonds, real estate investments, royalties, whatever. You put money to work, and it generates more money. Here's Kiyosaki's key insight. Employees and self-employed people, E and S, work for money and pay the highest taxes. Business owners and investors, B and I, have money work for them and pay the lowest taxes. Now, when I first learned about this, I was definitely stuck in the E quadrant, dreaming about the S quadrant. But this framework made me realize that the real goal isn't just to be self-employed. It's to build systems and investments that generate income without your constant involvement. Financial education versus job security. Here's something that really hit home for me in this book: the whole idea that job security is actually an illusion. Think about it. How many people do you know who thought they had secure jobs, only to get laid off during the 2008 financial crisis, or more recently, during the pandemic? Companies downsize, industries change, technology replaces jobs. There's no such thing as a job for life anymore. But instead of acknowledging this reality, most of us double down on the old strategy. We think, I just need better credentials, more education, a more specialized skill. And look, those things can help, but they're still keeping you in that employee mindset. Kiyosaki argues that financial education is way more important than job security. Instead of trying to climb the corporate ladder, what if you learned how money works? What if you understood taxes, debt, investing, and business? Now here's where I think some people misinterpret the book. Kiyosaki isn't saying quit your job tomorrow and start a business. That would be stupid for most people. What he's saying is, use your job to fund your financial education and your first investments. Use the security of your paycheck to take calculated risks that could eventually free you from depending on that paycheck. I remember when this first clicked for me. I was complaining to a friend about being stuck in my job, and she said, "Well, what are you doing about it?" I realized I was spending more time learning about my company's 401k plan than I was learning about investing in general. I knew more about my employee handbook than I did about basic financial principles. That's when I started reading books like this, taking courses, listening to podcasts, basically getting the financial education that school never gave me. And here's the crazy part. Once you start learning this stuff, you realize that wealthy people aren't necessarily smarter than everyone else. They just understand money better. They know the rules of the game that most of us were never taught. Making money work for you. So let's get practical for a minute. How do you actually make money work for you? Kiyosaki talks about several strategies, but I'll be honest, some of them are pretty advanced or require significant capital to get started. Real estate investing, starting businesses, buying into existing businesses, that stuff takes knowledge, experience, and usually quite a bit of money. But here's what I think is accessible to most people. Start thinking like an investor, even with small amounts. Instead of just saving money in a checking account earning basically nothing, what if you put it somewhere that generates income? Maybe that's a high-yield savings account. Maybe it's index funds that pay dividends. Maybe it's a small rental property in a few years once you've saved up. The key is to shift your mindset from consumer to investor. When you get extra money, a bonus, tax refund, whatever, your first thought shouldn't be, what can I buy? It should be, how can I invest this to generate more money? Now I gotta address something here because people always ask, but what specifically should I invest in? And honestly, that's where this book falls short. Kiyosaki is big on mindset, but light on specific strategies. He talks about real estate a lot, But real estate isn't right for everyone. He mentions stocks, but doesn't go deep into how to evaluate them. My take: use this book for the mindset shift, then get specific education about whatever investment strategies interest you. Read other books, take courses, maybe work with a financial advisor. But start with the mindset change, because without that, all the technical knowledge in the world won't help you. The biggest thing for me was just starting to see opportunities everywhere. Instead of driving by a for rent sign and thinking someone's making money off that, I started thinking, how could I do that? Instead of buying stuff on Amazon and complaining about how expensive everything is, I started thinking, what kind of business could I start? Corporations and taxes. All right, here's a section that gets pretty controversial, but it's worth understanding. Kiyosaki talks a lot about how rich people use corporations to minimize their taxes legally. The basic idea is that businesses get to deduct expenses before paying taxes, while employees pay taxes first and then pay expenses with what's left over. So if you're an employee making $50,000, you pay taxes on that full amount. Then use what's left to pay for your car, your meals, your travel, whatever. But if you're a business owner making $50,000, you can deduct legitimate business expenses, your car if you use it for business, business meals, business travel, and then pay taxes on what's left. Now, before everyone runs out and incorporates themselves, let me say this. This is complicated stuff that requires professional help. You can't just call everything a business expense and expect the IRS to be cool with it. There are rules, and if you break them, you're gonna have problems. But the bigger point is valid. The tax code is written to incentivize certain behaviors, like starting businesses and making investments. Rich people understand this and structure their finances accordingly. Most regular people don't even know these options exist. I'm not saying everyone should incorporate or start claiming questionable deductions, but it's worth understanding how the system works, because that knowledge might inform your decisions about side hustles, investments, or business opportunities. So who would benefit most from this book? I think it's perfect for people who are new to thinking about money strategically. If you've been following the traditional path, go to school, get a job, save for retirement, but feeling like something's missing, this book might open your eyes to different possibilities. It's also great for people who are stuck in the employee mindset and need a push to think bigger. Sometimes you need someone to shake you out of your assumptions about how money works. But if you're already investing, running businesses, or have a solid understanding of personal finance, you might find it too basic. Conclusion and key takeaways. All right, so let's wrap this up. What are the big takeaways from Rich Dad, Poor Dad? First, question everything you've been taught about money. The traditional advice, go to school, get a good job, buy a house, save for retirement, isn't necessarily wrong, but it's incomplete. It's a path to middle-class security, not wealth. Second, understand the difference between assets and liabilities. This alone will change how you make financial decisions. Before buying anything expensive, ask yourself, is this going to put money in my pocket or take money out of my pocket? Third, focus on building assets that generate cash flow. This doesn't have to be real estate or starting the next Facebook. It could be index funds that pay dividends, a side hustle that generates passive income, or learning skills that increase your earning potential. Fourth, invest in your financial education. The school system doesn't teach us about money, so we have to teach ourselves. Read books, take courses, find mentors. The more you understand how money works, the better decisions you'll make. Fifth, start thinking like an investor, not just a consumer. When you get extra money, your first thought should be, how can I make this money work for me? Not, what can I buy? And here's my personal take after reading this book multiple times. Don't get hung up on the specific investment strategies Kiyosaki recommends. The real value is in the mindset shift. Once you start thinking like an investor instead of just an employee, you'll start seeing opportunities that were always there but invisible to you before. This book changed the conversation about money for millions of people, and honestly, that's pretty powerful. It challenged the idea that financial struggle is just part of life, and it gave people permission to think bigger about their financial future. But remember, mindset is just the starting point. You still need to do the work of learning specific skills, taking calculated risks, and probably failing a few times before you succeed. So here's my question for you. What's your biggest takeaway from this? Are you more of a poor dad or rich dad mindset right now? And what's one small step you could take this week to start thinking more like an investor? Drop your thoughts in the comments. I really want to know what resonated with you. And if you found this helpful, definitely subscribe, because next week we're diving into The Millionaire Next Door, which has a totally different take on building wealth. It's going to be fascinating to compare the two approaches. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Book Bites.